Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Soul Podcasting Podcast. And today we're going to be talking about storytelling. And I'm excited. I have my guest with me today. Her name is Sara Lohse, and she is an award-winning author. She's a storyteller and a brand strategist who helps mission-driven brands amplify their impact through authentic storytelling. She's the founder of Favorite Daughter Media, and she's been featured on major stages like Podfest and FinCon, and also in the Authority magazine. So we're excited to talk more about podcasting to podcasters, and welcome to the show, Sara.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited too. And I mean, I'm looking at your background right now. I love it. I think that in itself probably is part of your story. And, you know, just storytelling in general is what we do as podcasters. And so we need some advice and support on how to be more authentic and how to do this, how to weave storytelling into our world. So I want to ask you first, what kind of drew you into storytelling in general? And when did you realize that this medium, this thing called storytelling, had the power to change how people connect with each other?
Yeah, it's funny because I actually learned how to tell my own story in a way that I never expected. And it really changed everything. So I guess the way that I learned how important it is and how impactful it is just by watching basically the aftermath of telling my own story. When I was in my mid-20s, I was at a conference. I was the director of marketing for a financial advising firm. I wanted to get the host of the podcast that I was producing, who was a CEO, booked on one of the biggest finance podcasts in the country. And I had no idea what I was doing. Never had pitched someone for a podcast before. So I stalked the host for a few days and finally basically cornered him when he wasn't expecting it and tried to pitch my then boss for his show. And I just went on a tangent of what he's an expert in. And the host, it says, "That's great. I don't need an expert. I need someone with a cool story."
Oh.
And I kind of froze and I may have had a stroke because what I said was, "Do you want to hear about the time I got a tattoo of a penis while I was in Ireland?"
And the answer was?
And he did.
You wanted to know.
And I accidentally got booked on one of the biggest finance podcasts in the country to tell that story.
Right.
And it was not my goal, but you don't say no when you get that offer. And I went on the show, and the host, it was Stacking Benjamins. It's Joe Saul-Sehy. He is such an artful and skilled interviewer that he guided me through telling the story in a way that pulled out impact and value and lessons that I didn't even realize were in my own story.
Wow.
I had thought of this story as just something silly I would tell at a bar when I was bartending to get some pity tips off of the people sitting by themselves. And suddenly, this is a life-changing experience that made me brave and taught me how to make bold choices and trust myself and believe in my potential and my capabilities. And it all somehow tied into this stupid tattoo I accidentally got on a bar crawl in Dublin. And suddenly, my whole life changed. I started making those bold decisions. I quit my job. I left my relationship that was not healthy. And I moved across the country. I launched my own companies and just really changed everything that I was doing. And it all started by the way that I learned how to tell this story and kind of figured out my own story and the way I wanted to rewrite it.
Oh, that's powerful. Sara, that's quite a story. I'll never forget this story that you just told me. So this is awesome. I love how you're sharing your journey into like the awakening of what storytelling can actually do for your life. Like it changed your life as you started making those bold decisions. Now, you run a podcast company. I want to also know a little bit about like what you do and what drew you into podcasting, because this is all fascinating for me.
Yeah, I got into podcasting while I was the director of marketing for a financial company. They had their own podcast. The CEO was the host. He was who I was trying to get on Stacking Benjamins. And when I started to really get involved in the industry, what actually drew me into podcasting was podcast guests. And as the producer, I had the pleasure and displeasure of a lot of people coming on the show and being really great guests and some of them not being really great guests. And I started to just rack up all of this just understanding of what it took to be a really great guest. And that is where I wanted to focus. So when I did originally launch Favorite Daughter Media, I launched it to help coach people into being better podcast guests. And what I found with that was really it comes down to being a good storyteller. And so it really ties in together. If you can tell a good story or you can turn a story into a good story, you can really be a great guest and you can bring a lot of value and do it in a way that's authentic and that builds connection and builds trust and empathy. And I kind of just fell in love with it. And I launched my second company a couple years later. It's called Branded Media, and that's the podcast production side. So I kind of do the same thing in reverse. I'm helping people be better hosts and better interviewers. And I draw from the experiences I've had with the hosts that I've guested with and from Joe Salsihai, who originally just got this whole thing rolling. So it's been so much fun for me to be able to pull those stories out the way that mine was pulled out of me and kind of bring it all back full circle.
I love that. And I like hearing the backstory because there's a story behind everything. And as we are moving in this realm as podcasters, as podcast hosts, and as guests, it's great to see those of us who are also producing podcasts and running companies, like how we're able to integrate all of this in both sides of the spectrum. So it's not just about being a good host, but also being a good guest and what that means as far as how storytelling is weaved throughout all of that. And I know you've talked about storytelling being more than just like sharing your words. It's more like you talked about empathy, connection. I believe I heard that just now. And I'm wondering how, for solopreneurs that are listening right now, what's one thing most people get wrong about storytelling? I know it's kind of one of those questions, like you might have to think about it a bit, but what do you feel like people are getting wrong? Because you've been doing this a while. And so what's a better way to think about storytelling?
Yeah, the thing that I see the most often, and this is on podcasts, this is on stages. I actually judged a speaking competition a couple years ago, and it was the most severe example that I saw in person. That it was a 3-minute each competition, and you had 3 minutes to tell a story that ends with like a lesson that the audience can walk away with, and it can be actionable. And what I was seeing was every single person in this competition was telling that one big story. Their like childhood trauma story, their I almost died and then my life changed story. It was all really heavily rooted in trauma, drama, or just sensationalism. And it makes sense because that's what we're surrounded with. We're in this 24/7 news cycle. And we're just bombarded with headlines at all times. And when you hear like you need to tell a story, you have to tell your story. Our brains just automatically go to that place. And we think that is the story that we need to tell. And while that's not a bad story to tell, it has its times and it has its moments, but it doesn't fit every single time. And I saw that firsthand in this competition because they would tell this story and there's not a dry eye in the house. Like people are sobbing. And then they bring it back to the message at the end. And that's why you need a business coach or just something so out of left field.
Right.
And I'm like, I'm sorry. That's what?
How are these connected?
I think that's why you need like early cancer screenings or something. Like that is not the lesson here.
Exactly.
And I just was realizing that people are just kind of taking this one story and trying to shoehorn it into every situation because we're just kind of trained to think that's the story that we need to tell. So what I try to help people do is find other stories and find their smaller stories, find their day-to-day, the minutia stories that they don't realize are important in the moment.
Yeah.
But when you look back and when you tell them in the right way, they can have so much value. They're just not necessarily the headline worthy stories, and that's okay.
And we all have those smaller stories. It's just a matter of how do we find them? And then you coach people through that, like finding those stories in their lives that they can share, because some are going to be embarrassing and some are going to be, things that show our humanity, like our failures, not just our successes. And so when you kind of guide your clients through that, do you give them a mix of, so share a little bit of this and a little bit of that, or do you kind of lean them more toward a specific formula for how to choose their stories to share?
It really kind of comes down to like reverse engineering it. I think the mistake that people make is when they hear like storytelling, we think of stories as these made up ideas. Like when I say tell a story, I don't mean write a novel. And that's something that I see a lot too when people are like, well, I have to like write my story. It's like, no, your story is already written. You've already done it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a matter of coming up with this story. It's what is the message? Why are you trying to tell a story? Start with that why. I mean, it's that classic, is it Stephen Covey? I don't know. Begin with the end in mind.
Right.
Whoever said it. But when you start with, this is what I want people to understand, instead of this is a story I want to tell, you can basically just walk people through how did you learn that? If this is the message that is so important to you, how did you figure it out? How did you learn it? What did you try first and fail at? What did you do trying to learn this lesson that blew up in your face and you had to start over? What were the little successes that you saw when you were learning this? Yeah. If you start with the end with that message, the stories write themselves because you're just sharing your own experiences.
That's so true. Yeah. Start with the end in mind, reverse engineer it. That makes a lot of sense. And then that's kind of my next thing I was going to ask you about is strategy, but that is strategy. It's like the authenticity of who you are and then strategizing how you're going to tell that story. I know that a lot of creators struggle with like just being authentic and sharing, because it's just a matter of choosing, like, what do I want to put on the table? What do I want to put out there for those who need my support as a solopreneur, as, an author, whoever I am, whatever I bring to the table? How do I want to present that? And I often wonder, is how, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, there's so many ways you can present, and you can choose to share certain parts of you. You can choose not to. I think that was my next question, actually. How do you know what to share? Because there are some things that really would be instrumental in helping your audience if you're authentic and you're comfortable enough to share it. Some failures, some humiliating examples of things you've done that really could make that connection with your audience. But how do you know when it's safe to share those things?
That's a really good question. And I have like 47 different answers in my head right now. One is that the reason that we tell stories is for connection. Humans are just wired to crave connections with other people. And those connections come from shared experiences. So when you're telling a story, you're triggering these just memories and experiences in other people's brains, and they're able to put themselves in your shoes and envision you in theirs and just know that you've been in the similar place. And that's part of the reason why that one big story that everyone is sharing doesn't have as much of an impact as you might want it to, because they're not going to be that relatable. Like, you can have this amazing, like, rags to riches story, and you've been through all of it, and you've really suffered, and you've come back on top and everything. And that is amazing. And that can be inspirational. But as someone listening, if I didn't start at rags and I didn't have not yet got into riches, I want to know the middle. And what were those little changes that you started making? And what were the steps that you take? I don't need to just know I went through this. It's I did this and this and this and this and this. Like, what is the how?
Yeah.
And I think we want to trigger these connections. And when you're telling a story and you're listening to a story, it's actually releasing oxytocin in the person's brain. And that oxytocin is going to trigger more feelings of empathy. And so you want to be eliciting emotions. But people seem to forget that there are more emotions out there than just sad.
Mm.
You can elicit joy and laughter and anxiety and like all of these other feelings that you can get people to have. And the one that you choose is going to be dependent on why you're trying to tell this story and what your goal is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it is very difficult to be vulnerable. And what I have found as the easiest way to get past that is if you're going to share something that is deeply personal and you're like, I don't know if I'm ready for people to know this. First of all, it's your story. You're in charge. If you don't want to tell it, don't. That's okay. But also reframing it so that you're not making it about yourself can be really helpful. If I'm going to tell a really vulnerable story, something very difficult that I went through, I'm not telling it because I want you to know that I went through this. I'm telling it because you may have gone through this. And I want you to know you're not the only one. And I want you to know that I've been there too, and I made it through. I came out on the other side and I'm okay. Yeah. And you can also be okay. So if instead of making it about yourself and I want you to know about me, make it about the person listening and who needs to hear this, who can be impacted by this. And it makes it easier to tell.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. That's so good. That's good advice. And it's just really about making that connection when you're ready, however you're ready, just being comfortable in your skin. And if you're not ready, don't force it, and share, like you said, reframe it and make it about the listener, not so much about yourself. That's super, super advice. And I want to hear more about what you offer because you do a lot for the podcaster, for the solopreneur. You have a book behind you that I'm looking at right now. Would you mind sharing with us about your book? I'm reading the title, Open This Book. So I'm excited to see it. That is awesome.
I would love to. Thank you. This book is it's a lot for me. It's something that was many years in the making, and I published it originally when I was 28, and it's very rare for a non-famous, super successful 28-year-old to write a memoir. But I kind of did because it's Open This Book. It's the art of storytelling for aspiring thought leaders. And I decided when I was writing it that if I'm going to tell you that you need to tell your story, the only way I can do it is through mine. So the whole book is teaching different concepts of storytelling and different strategies and tactics and ways that you could tell your story and the types of stories you can tell. But I tell it through my own. So it's almost a memoir. But it's also part journal. So you can start telling your own stories. And it all came from the way that I learned how to tell my story on Stacking Benjamins. The host of that show actually wrote the foreword for it, which was amazing of him to do. Okay. And it's been a really just interesting experience to just know that so many people are reading my stories and using them to help develop their own and be able to talk to some of the people who have read it and hear the stories that they came out with, or just to for them to tell me that they've started to tell their own stories and do it in a way that's been impacting their brand and growing their business has just been really, really amazing.
Okay, I love memoirs, and so yours is next for me. I have to get that book. I'm just amazed at the work that you're doing to help people to share their voice and to tell their story. I love that you have a book. Share with us anything else that you have for podcasters to just help us in our journey of learning how to share more and more about our world and how do we get there? So, what do you offer and where can we reach you?
Yeah, thank you. I do everything within the storytelling and podcasting space. So if you want to tell your story on a podcast as a guest, as a host, if you want to tell your story on a stage, I work with speakers. I've helped write TEDx talks and produce podcasts, train people on how to be a better guest and just learn how to take their stories and incorporate them everywhere, whether it's in client meetings or in a book or on a podcast, on a stage, just in conversations. I've talked to teachers about how they can connect better with their students. Just any way that if you're interacting with other people, you want to be connecting with them, and stories is the way to do it. So I just focus all of my energy and my effort there as much as I can. And like I said, the book is also part journal. So I've actually taken all of the journal entries, all of the writing prompts out of the book and publish them separately. And it's available for free to download on my website. So if you go to openthisjournal.com, you can download that totally for free and just start writing your own stories and figuring out what those stories are and how you can start using them to grow as a solopreneur, as a business owner, as a professional, as a person, whatever your goal is.
Very, very cool. I am writing down your URL right now. Get that in the show notes because definitely we want to access these resources to help us. And I appreciate you and your story. Thank you for coming on and sharing your story with us and encouraging us to share ours. So I appreciate you, Sara.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.